closer and closer to today, and it makes today that much more poignant once we get there. So my iPad tells me we are now live. If you haven't figured out, at the 8 o'clock service, when I walk up here, I stall. Yes. While she gets the camera ready, and then when it's ready, it pops up here telling me we're live, so that I can welcome the folks who are watching live on Facebook, or will be watching this tape later on today or later in the week. Every week, hundreds of you, literally hundreds, some weeks over 1,000, but hundreds every week, watch this video, and we are reaching more and more people this way. If you're watching either live or on tape, don't forget, if you go to the church website, not the Facebook page, but the church website, and you click prayer request, there's a link right there that will take you to a form that you can fill out. You can send a private prayer request to me, but we are grateful that you join us electronically. So Melissa mentioned Easter eggs. How many of you still dye Easter eggs at your house? Let's see hands. Not many. Okay, not many. This is the first year in, honestly, I can't remember how many years that we haven't dyed Easter eggs. And the truth of the matter is, I could come up with all sorts of excuses why, but the truth is just a series of seemingly unrelated events led to us not doing eggs this year, and that's okay. That's all right. Our youngest kid is 17, and although we laugh and have a good time when we do it, when your youngest kid is 17, nobody in the house is devastated if you don't have pink fingers for a few days after Easter. But I always think of dyeing Easter eggs when Easter comes. In fact, I recently, Wednesday morning, I guess it was, I drove to the local Walmart and I bought, I think, 15 dozen eggs in the 18 packs. I mean, I had, the whole bottom of the cart covered in those packs. And if you know Shirley, who works out there, Shirley says to me, "You dyeing eggs for the kids at church?" I said, "Nope, I'm going to scramble them and I'm going to eat them." And I said, "Well, other people are going to help me." We did a sausage and egg casserole last Wednesday night. But when I was a kid, dyeing Easter eggs was a big deal. And of course, they didn't have all the fun variety of Easter egg dyes that they do now. I don't know about you, I literally can't smell vinegar to this day without thinking of Easter eggs, because that's the way you did Easter eggs. And the way it worked at my house growing up is after the kids would dye the eggs, then we would have to stay inside away from the windows with Mom while Dad went out in the yard and hid them. That's the way it worked at our house. Everybody has their own traditions, but that's the way we did it. And we would wait oh so impatiently while Dad would hide the eggs out in the yard. Now, my siblings were 4 and 6 years older than me, and if my math holds, they still are, but that made me the baby of the family. And so it also meant that it was much easier for them to find the eggs than it was for me. You know how it goes. The older you get, the easier it is to find the eggs. And you don't have a lot of sympathy for your little brother when you're looking for eggs. So it's not unusual that the little brother ends up with hardly any eggs and maybe some tears over not finding many eggs. Well, I think my dad got sick of that. So I remember distinctly one year, he took the dog's water bowl, he took it 50 feet out away from the house, we had a big yard, out in the middle of the yard. He set 4 Easter eggs on the ground, out in the middle of nowhere, not near anything, dumped the water out of the bowl, turned the bowl upside down on the eggs, again, out in the middle of nowhere, 50 feet from where the bowl normally sat. He pitched me a big old softball to make sure I would find at least 4 eggs. And he told my siblings, you leave those 4 eggs alone. And yet the funny thing was, I still didn't find those 4 eggs. And I attribute it to being the baby of the family. My brother was a little more pragmatic about it than that. He said, and I quote, no, it's because you're stupid. Happy Easter. So today we wrap up a journey that we started on Ash Wednesday. We started a traveling journey on Ash Wednesday from one geographic location to another as we have walked through this series that we have called, Oh, the Places You'll Go. We've looked at the geography of the Easter story, how that geography really helps us understand the Easter story a little better. If you remember, we started in the wilderness way south down by the Dead Sea, and then we really, if you think about it, we made a series of trips back and forth between that area, the wilderness Jerusalem area down south by the Dead Sea, and the Galilee area up north by the Sea of Galilee. We really just kind of went back and forth between those two areas, stopping along the way every time we went. It really illustrates Jesus never traveled more than about 70 to 100 miles away from where he was born. He really never got out into the wide world, as we would call it, at all. His geographic area was fairly small. And along the way, he took us to through the temptation, to a wedding at Cana. He took us to the cleansing of the temple. He took us by Jacob's well to meet the woman. He took us to a man possessed by demons, a young man he raised from the dead in Nain, all the way through the triumphal entry into Jerusalem just last Sunday. And then the events of Holy Week happened, which we touched on Thursday. And now, finally, after all these weeks and all this travel, we end up with today's scripture.
Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where to find him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying.
Now, if you know me at all, you know that I am a rabid baseball fan. Yes, I love the St. Louis Cardinals, and I'm not going there. Cub fans, don't worry. We're not going to have that argument. But I also just love the game. Our custodian, Kent, is a huge fan and a huge student of the game. We drive his wife, Colleen, crazy, because I'll come over here and don't be cleaning. And Kent and I will get in a discussion about baseball, and she stands there a minute because they're supposed to be working, and then she'll finally roll her eyes and go back to work. But I'm a great student of the game, love the game. And with that in mind, I want to share 3 of the most lopsided trades in Major League Baseball history. First one I'm going to lift up happened on January the 3rd, 1920. Boston Red Sox, they sell a pretty successful pitcher by the name of George Herman Ruth to the New York Yankees for what was a pretty healthy sum of money back then, $100,000. There's no trade. They sold him to the Yankees. Well, we all know Yankees immediately converted Ruth over to an outfielder so they get his bat in the lineup every day. And of course, Babe Ruth goes on to be a legend, literally. And we all know how that trade went for Boston. And all I have to do is lift up 4 words: curse of the Bambino. They went decades without a World Series, and everybody in Boston blamed it on the curse of the Bambino, Babe Ruth. Second trade I want to lift up happened on June the 15th, 1964. The Chicago Cubs trade a young outfielder by the name of Lou Brock, along with pitchers Jack Spring and Paul Toth. They trade him to the St. Louis Cardinals for 2 pitchers and an outfielder. The pitchers were Ernie Broglio, who was a fairly established guy. He was probably the biggest name in the trade, and Bobby Shantz, along with an outfielder named Doug Clemens. That's 6 players total, 3 on each side of that trade. The reality is 5 of them never really amounted to much or much more after that trade happened. Even the big name, Ernie Broglio. None of the 5 of them ever contributed much at all to the team they ended up with. And all Lou Brock did was to go on and become one of the greatest baseball players of all time. He won 2 World Series in his career, and he was a first ballot Hall of Famer when he became eligible to be elected. Now, lest you Cub fans think I'm picking on you by picking up the Brock trade, on January 27th, 1982, the Cubs traded then very popular all-star shortstop Ivan DeJesus to the Philadelphia Phillies for 2 players. Larry Bowa, who was a shortstop, quite accomplished, another all-star kind of shortstop, and a relatively young, unknown second baseman named Ryan Sandberg. Now, DeJesus played 3 very uninspiring seasons for the Phillies. Larry Bowa played 3.5 decent seasons for the Chicago Cubs. The real jewel of that trade turned out to be Sandberg. He played 15 stellar years for the Cubs and was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame. So those 3 are all very impressive and very lopsided trades. But the most impressive trade in history is the one we celebrate today. Jesus Christ traded his death for our forgiveness. He traded his life for our eternity. It was and remains an amazing trade. And it's an offer that's made to anybody who will receive it, which makes it even more amazing. So on Easter, I think about that trade, and I think about a word pops into my head, and that word is hope. And so I wonder, when you're looking for hope, when you need hope in your life and you're looking for it, where do you look? And I'm guessing that the answer that immediately pops into your head is not a cemetery. I'm guessing that's not the go-to answer when I ask you, where do you look for hope? Why would it be? That couldn't possibly be right. That can't be where the search of hope leads us to, right? Can't lead us to a cemetery, because that would make me want to give up ever even looking for hope, frankly. And yet Easter reminds us that we are called to never give up hope. that it's always just around the next corner. We're always reminded by Easter that death does not have the final answer, doesn't have the final word, that when all hope seems lost, it's actually just beginning. And that's what Mary Magdalene and all those other Marys that Melissa talked about earlier, that's when they came to the cemetery, they came looking for hope that morning, that Easter morning. They came to anoint a body, but they also came somehow, some way, looking for hope. And the cool thing was they came and they weren't disappointed by coming there and looking for that. So I wonder, do you remember Jesus' last words from the cross? 3 words. It is finished. Those were his last 3 words from the cross, and then he died. Nobody took his life from him. He willingly gave it up, and only when his earthly duties were done. When he said it is finished, he wasn't saying, I can't go any further, I'm going to die. He was saying, everything I came to accomplish has now been accomplished. It's finished. It's time. That's what happened. And when one of the soldiers taking him down, if you remember the story, it's kind of gruesome, but to make sure he was dead, one of the soldiers stabbed him in the side, and as it describes, an issue of blood and water came out of Jesus' side. And if you know anything about physiology in true CSI crime scene fashion, that rush of fluids out of the body reveals the actual cause of death, a burst aorta. So Jesus died of a broken heart. And yet here on this Easter morning, we get the great reveal that his sacrifice was not the end of the mission, because out of that broken heart emerged a new heart, our new heart, our resurrected heart, our unbreakable, unstoppable heart. So on Easter morning, it is finished, now becomes, now it begins. Life begins fresh and anew on Easter in the resurrected rhythms of an Easter heart. And it's the same Easter heart that Jesus offers to all who will believe him. So my question on this Easter morning is, are we a church full of people whose hearts are full of Easter? And here are 4 ways that you can tell. An Easter heart church is full of what I would call rock rollers. Not rock and rollers, although some of us lean that way, but instead rock rollers. Because the first sign of the resurrection on that very first Easter morning was the rock being rolled away, offering a way out of captivity and out into the broad light of day. And we all need that. We all need to be offered a way out. And rock rollers do that. They help offer a way out to all sorts of people who are trapped in all sorts of tombs. And so, strengthened by an Easter heart, we can help people roll away the rock of despair and reveal a path that leads to renewed hope. But rock rolling, I want to be clear, it's not a one-person job. A lot of churches say, we don't do ministry, we hire our pastor to do that. Fortunately, you are not one of those churches. It takes a community of Easter hearts to get the rocks rolling in the right direction. A second way you can tell is that an Easter heart church is always in a state of arrhythmia. And yes, you heard me say that word right if you know what that word means. Arrhythmia. You're thinking, wait, isn't that an irregular heartbeat? Yep, it is. Easter heart churches have an irregular heartbeat because the unexpected is always happening. resurrection happens, and miracles happen, and the truth happens, and goodness and beauty happen. Jesus Christ happens in Easter heart churches. So if you have an Easter heart, you learn to expect the unexpected as what comes along all the time. You learn to relish the ridiculous, and you learn to savor the sensational. The third way you know is that an Easter heart church is filled with laughter. Resurrection is the best example of laughter. He who laughs last laughs best. Because the religious authorities, the Roman leaders, the cruel crowds, the sadistic soldiers, they all thought they had the last laugh on Good Friday. Turns out they were wrong. The resurrection proves that God has the last laugh, because Jesus walked out of the grave on Easter morning. So it's okay to laugh in church. In fact, in this church, it's nearly a requirement to have laughter in God's house. Faith without laughter is faith without joy. I would say a church without laughter is nothing more than a lifeless, joyless country club. And I am grateful that that is not the kind of church that you and I serve together. And then the fourth way, an Easter heart is a broken heart. Maybe that's the best image of the gospel possible. And right now you're saying, okay, wait, Pastor, I'm confused. You had me right up until saying that an Easter heart is a broken heart. Well, here's the deal. The promise of Easter Sunday is not that your heart won't break. In fact, if you are truly willing to dare to love unconditionally, your heart is going to break along the way. For God so loved the world that his heart was broken. And the cross is the symbol of that broken heart that God had. It's the ultimate price of the love that he has for us. The price of love is sometimes suffering, and it's sometimes a broken heart. You see, Easter's power isn't found in a heart that will never break. Instead, Easter's power is found in the fact that out of the broken heart, God births a new heart, a whole heart, a renewed, restored, reinvigorated heart. So my question to you is your heart breaking this Easter Sunday? And if it is it breaking for the same things that break God's heart? Is your heart breaking for the least and the last and the lost on this Easter Sunday? I want you to think about how fast news travels in this day and age. You got Facebook, you got Twitter, you got Snapchat and YouTube and blogging and texting and such. News reaches us faster than it's ever reached us in the history of humans. And the good news of an empty tomb and a risen Savior is the best news ever. So we need to make sure that news gets out. Because we are called to reflect the light of God's love. So we've walked along the journey, the places that we have gone. Along the way, we've heard the carpenter's call on our lives. And the truth is, along the way, we've been chosen. We've been called to help make Jesus come alive in the lives of other people. We have the best story in history because the grave could not contain him. Would you pray with me? Father God, I thank you